Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another episode on Swole Radio. So today I have the fortune of being joined again by Jeff Alberts, who's, as most of you should know, is a world-renowned natural bodybuilder and natural bodybuilding coach at 3DMJ, one of the best in the world. Placed sixth at Worlds at the age of 48 in bodybuilding, and is definitely a wealth of experience and knowledge. So today we're going to be talking about the current situation with coronavirus. It's March 28th. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing pretty good. You build me up like I'm just this magical special dude, but I'm just a guy like everybody else that just lifts weights. So yeah, I'm just a normal dude, man, that's just been doing it for a long time. So hopefully my experience can maybe help someone.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so what's the situation like for you where you are right now?
So I'm in California, and I'm like where I live is about an hour and a half outside of the Bay Area. So of course, the Bay Area is highly populated, but where I'm at in the Valley, I'm in a fairly decently large city, but I think in my county, it's not super prevalent here. But still, with that said, I'm very, very conservative just by nature. So of course, as a father and husband, I'm a protector. So I'm always on top of my wife. Hey, you need to stay inside. Don't be going out. And she's kind of a little bit opposite. She's definitely more social than I am. So I think it's impacting her a little bit more so than me, because the last 10 years of my life personally, it's almost like I've been under quarantine as a online coach. I worked from home for 10 years. So my
Yeah.
daily life is kind of similar, because I'm always at home, and I'm very fortunate enough to have a home gym. So, everything I've done over the last 10 years, work from home, train from home. And so personally, it hasn't impacted me too much, but as a dad, it's impacted me just because I'm like on edge, because I am that protector. And of course, with the economic situation as well, when people don't have gyms to train at, it does impact, our field, our business, of coaching and things like that. So it's definitely impacting here at home. But I'm trying to just, take it as a half glass full mindset, trying to stay positive and just taking it day by day. But, thankfully we're all healthy here at home. So that's the main thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So today I think we're going to talk a little bit about just mindset in terms of approaching this whole pandemic situation, and we'll talk a little bit about nuts and bolts of training and diet, and discussing ways of making the best of this time. Just as a note, there was a recent episode on the 3DMJ podcast where 3DMJ coaches, including Jeff, talk about really go into this coronavirus thing and how to approach it, and it was a really uplifting, I feel, and thanks for doing that.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and I think this one too, I think even for me personally, like on a personal level, like when you said, "Hey Jeff, you want to come on and do a podcast about this?" I'm like, "Yeah," because to me, just being able to sit down with someone to talk about, personal stuff, we're all human. We're all experiencing this, and it's impacting us, on different levels. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's just therapeutic to be able to share my thoughts. And even if it doesn't help the masses, even if it just only helps one person, it's worth taking the time. So in a way, it's like me sharing my journey, even before the coronavirus. It's always been kind of a therapeutic thing, kind of helps me, because I know I'm helping at least someone out there. And
Yeah.
it kind of just takes me away from my reality. So this morning for an hour or whatever, it's me getting away and just, potentially helping somebody, and therapeutic on my end.
Yeah, and I think especially for us bodybuilders, that's since we're such a rare breed, I guess it's sometimes hard for other people to relate. So it's really nice to be able to connect. And when this whole situation first came out, um, this I was 10 days out from my first show, and
Oh shit.
And yeah, and it got
Yeah.
canceled, and it got canceled. Everything got canceled, and I remember the first day, like when I first got the news. Um, Actually, today is supposed to be the day of my show. Yeah, like it was 10 days ago when
Mm.
everything got canceled, and I was just feeling really lost. And I actually saw a post by you on Instagram where you were talking about not to give up hope and really giving a positive light on the situation. And that made a huge difference for me. And I think there are a lot of athletes out there, preppers and bodybuilders, who are also going to be similarly uplifted.
I mean, yeah, it's like if we think about it, like bodybuilding is so minuscule, as far as like priorities in life. Like it's an important endeavor. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great hobby to do and it's a positive thing, but at the same time, it's like what matters most is, family, friends, and your overall well-being. And there's going to be shows in the future. We're going to get past this. There's going to be shows in the future. And even, prior to, this situation, that's what I tell a lot of my athletes is that shows are a dime a dozen, and your family and friends is what really is most important. And so that's kind of was my outlook with this is that, even if let's say we can't do shows or let's say your training environment isn't what you're accustomed to, it's changed. And I don't think people will see regression if they're still training, regardless. But we can talk about that later on in the podcast. But just the fact that, if you do lose some gains or whatever, it's temporary. But obviously, if you lose your health, that's permanent,
Hmm.
or if your family members get sick, that could have some bad consequences and that could be permanent. So to me, it's like, hey, let's you know, just appreciate what we do have, not what we can't do. It's more like focus on what you can do. And it is frustrating though. Don't get me wrong. I can only imagine if I was 10 days out from a show and I've been training for years, right? Like training for years to develop a physique and then dieting for weeks and weeks and weeks to present it. And then all of a sudden it's like, that's gone. But at the same time, you have to kind of look back and think about, okay, what did I accomplish? Um, and sure, you didn't get to celebrate it, but you gained a lot of knowledge, I'm sure, going through the process and getting to the end. And hopefully, you captured that physique with some good photos, at least, because that's what I've encouraged people to do. Is like, hey, if you've been prepping and you're deep into a prep, capture that. Like, get a photo shoot, do something, or just you get some good quality photos yourself to capture that. Because when I look back at my career, like especially last year's competitions back in 2014, those shows, like I'm reflecting more on the photos than I am the actual shows.
Hmm.
It's like looking at the pictures going, wow, okay, I created that. Like to me, that's a trophy that's you're gonna have for the rest of your life, and you're always gonna remember that more so than, oh yeah, I placed first place in this show or whatever. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of my more or less I'm trying to help my athletes through now that are some of them are still prepping, with the hopes that they're not going to keep postponing shows in the
Yeah.
fall.
Wow.
But at this, you think about it too. It's like let's say you let go of this goal, you'll just stop. Like to me, it's almost like if you keep moving with your goal, as long as it's safe and it's healthy, that that's kind of like a good movie, right? You go to a movie theater for 2 hours, you escape reality for 2 hours.
Hmm.
So to me, it's like people's training, the like if they're prepping or whatever, that can be someone's escape. Might not be for everybody. Like there's some people that I had a couple athletes say, you know what, Jeff, I just can't do it right now, and that's okay. That's okay because everybody's different. Like I said earlier, it's like it's impacting people differently. So if there's some people that are prepping and that's their escape, then I'm definitely want to support that. Again, as long as it's on the healthier side.
Hmm. Yeah, I think this has been really powerful in terms of, yeah, just zooming out and first of all thinking about priorities, and what really matters is that we're healthy and the people that we love are healthy. And after that, it's just on the long scale, in terms of time, it's just going to be a blip in the horizon. And I think a good way of thinking about it for me was, yeah, in terms of the thinking about the shows and the placing in trophies was to think back to, say, my old, track and field days in high school. And I remember my coach at the time telling me, "Oh, all that matters is your actual performance, like the time that you run and the trophies you get." Like, she would tell me stories of her athletes through like throwing out trophies in the garbage, because in the end, what does that really, when you think back to, say, an athletic event from your as a teenager, and it mattered so much the time, whether you place first or second, and you look back on it and you don't even remember, and like all that matters is the memories and the experiences, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm trying to think back, like if I was in my early 20s, when I was first starting competing, and my older self, like myself now, said, "Hey Jeff, you need to chill about the winning and all that," and I probably wouldn't have listened to it, or I wouldn't have fully understood it. So it's kind of easy for me now with like all of the years of experience that I've had, all the shows that I've done, all the preps that I've done, to have the mindset I have now. So I know for some people it's probably going to be hard to comprehend that mindset, because it's like, man, you put so much work into something, and then now you don't get to show it off. It can be disheartening. But again, it's super important just think about the grand scheme of things. Like we're talking like major sports, like all sports are basically shut down. They just moved to the Olympics to next year. So I mean, basically the world is shutting down right now,
Hmm.
and that just kind of shows you the scheme of this, is like how just crazy it is right now. So to think like, okay, a bodybuilding show, yeah, it sucks you don't get to do it or whatever, but man, we're talking like a serious situation where, to me, for me on a personal level, it's getting me, like when I look at my son now, like just playing in the backyard, playing with him, it like makes me look at him on a deeper level. Like there's no guarantee that we're going to be here tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now. So on a personal level too, like when Bryant passed away, I was not a Kobe Bryant fan prior to that. Like, I mean, I watched him play, on TV, and I appreciated, you know, basically the talent level, the work ethic, all that. But I wasn't like, a fan or anything like that. But when he passed, it was like as a father, it made me feel really, really bad for him and his family, because it just kind of awakened me even more. Like, there's no guarantees on anything. So to
Hmm.
me, it's like, even if, let's say, for you who didn't get to compete in your show today, which would have been your show, just appreciate the fact that we're still here. We're able to actually have a conversation and just be in the moment and be present and appreciate the fact that we're able to do this. And this is our second podcast, and now we get to know each other even a little bit better. So there's things in life that I guess that I can look on, like, the tragic death of Kobe Bryant, or what we're facing today. It just makes me appreciate what I do have that much more. And that's, to me, is like more important than, hey, I'm missing out on a show.
Hmm.
Um, and in the end too, like, you think about it, if we're on our deathbed, I don't think we're going to be like, let's say it's 50 years from now or whatever. Maybe less for me because I'm older. Maybe though, I might be 100, make it, but we're not going to think about a bodybuilding show. We're going to think about family, friends, maybe the experiences that we shared together. So to me, it's like, yeah, it's a little disheartening that we're missing on some of these things, um, but they're not necessities necessarily.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's definitely made me rethink my perspective. And I think something that you guys talked about on your podcast that you brought up that I really resonated with was how sort of impactful it was to have this reactionary mindset in terms of this pandemic. It's such a serious thing, and you really actually felt a quite like, yeah, I initially wanted to had this control response, and I think a lot of bodybuilders have this sort of obsessive compulsive personality type, or trending towards it, where you just want to be in control of everything, and when you don't have control, you initially feel anxiety, and you want to like wrest control back to yourself, and when it's taken from you, you actually felt like I actually felt a lot more at peace when I realized, there's nothing I can do to change the situation, and you just got to take things day by day and roll with it.
That's just it. I mean, we can't control what's going on. Like, and like just to kind of talk more like on a bodybuilding level,
Mm-hmm.
like all of a sudden everybody's their way of doing things got flipped up upside down, because basically we're used to these fancy commercial gyms. We have all these bodybuilding shows. Like basically our life in the bodybuilding world just got flipped upside down. So of course people are going to be like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? I can't use that nice leg press at the gym anymore. How am I going to make quad gains and things like
Exactly.
that?" So things got flipped upside down, and instead of like, and I knew right away, like as a coach, I'm like, okay, I need to calm my athletes down before I even got any reports or anything like that. It was over the weekend too. It was like on a Sunday. I'm like, all right, when I get up in the morning on Monday, I need to be basically proactive and get a video out to all my athletes and just kind of give them, my perspective on things and kind of how I'm looking at things, as focusing on what I can do versus what I can't do, and just kind of reassuring that, hey, family, friends is the priority still. And as far as training goes, even if things change with training and we're creating stimulus, we're not going to see any muscle loss. And I used one of my experiences from when I went on my vacations last year during prep, and I was training using the 5-gallon water jug. Who would have known that, that training with a 5-gallon water jug all of a sudden is like a popular thing to do now. Um, but it was just like, okay, I got back from vacation and, I didn't lose muscle mass, and, I wasn't seeing any regression or anything. So it's just more like a reassurance video to everybody that we're going to be okay. But like you said, it's like it's just everything got flipped upside down. And, I think as like you said, as bodybuilders, we're kind of control freaks. We have to have everything in order, or we
Yeah.
want to know everything ahead of time.
Hmm.
And like that's why we look up to like these guys online, or the social media stars. Like we think they have all the answers. So we're looking up at everybody, looking externally to get all these answers ahead of time to give us that sense of security. Like,
Hmm.
okay, if I follow it like Eric Helm says, then I know I'm going to be okay because he's knowledgeable, he has expertise, he's been there, he's done it. So you're like, okay, if I do it like him, like what he's saying, then I'm going to be okay. So it gives you a sense of security. But you pull all that stuff away, then everybody's a mess. But to me, I'm looking at it as like, okay, what a great opportunity for everybody. Like, yeah, it sucks. Don't get me wrong with what's going on in the world. Like, I wish it wouldn't happen, but it's given people an opportunity in the bodybuilding world to see and experience other types of training. And actually, in a sense, they're kind of going by feel now.
Hmm.
And I don't think I've seen anybody, at least in my social media world, I haven't seen anybody post anything that says, I'm training still, but I'm losing out. I'm like, all of a sudden I'm shrinking.
Hmm.
I don't think I've seen anybody say that just yet.
Yeah.
I would say people that stop training altogether, like you're probably going to see, yeah, some regression. From my years of experience, like the times where I've actually seen regression is when I stopped training,
Hmm.
not when I've been suboptimal with training.
Yeah.
Maybe your progress moving forward if you don't have all that fancy equipment, and maybe your performance isn't where it should be. Yeah, maybe you're not progressing at, let's say, 5% rate that you were prior. Maybe you're at 1%, but you're still moving forward.
Hmm.
And that's you should look at that as like, okay, that's right now, that's the current optimal. And I would be super happy with that. If I was going the other way, like and that's basically caused by not training, then that's a problem. So, and if you stop training, like think of the times maybe when you stopped training, how did it make you feel? I know for me personally, when I stop training and I see regression, not only does it feel shitty not to train because you're like, oh, I should be training, but when you see the regression, it's like a double whammy. You're like, oh, I don't like the way it feels because I'm not training, but now I really hate the way it feels because now I don't look the way I want to look.
Oh yeah.
So to me, that kind of just, you kind of spiral out of control. So, especially right now with what's going on in the world, it's like, yeah, okay, our health is definitely the most important thing, our family, but at the same time, you have to take care of yourself too. And I know for me personally, I'm encouraging all my other, hey, you gotta train, even if it's doing push-ups or whatever. That's your movie time. That's your escape from reality, but it's gonna keep you grounded through this. So that's something positive you can gravitate towards when maybe everything is very uncertain around you outside of like your training, outside of the gym environment.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there are actually going to be a few ways that people can turn this into an even a fully positive situation, even from a bodybuilding standpoint. And I think that there are actual benefits that this time is going to give people that they actually wouldn't have had otherwise. Just in terms of the fact that it's forcing us to learn about ourselves, learn about how our bodies move, and how we can sort of program through difficult situations or things that might not seem optimal on paper. I wanted to ask Ashley on the note of your um, it was funny seeing the videos of you with your water jug training, like smeared all over Instagram, and it was great actually because it was just what we needed to see at the time. Are there any? Can you recall any sort of long extended periods of time when you had suboptimal training, as you would look back on now, and sort of how that impacted you?
Well, it's interesting. I could look back at my training from the time I was probably like in my early 20s all the way
Yeah.
to my late 30s when I was training with Mike Mincer's and Dorian Yates's hit training, like low volume, high intensity. Like, yeah, it was effective. So let's say my progress rate was 2%. But once I got into my late 30s and now where I'm at now, by learning other methods, a little more volume, less intensity, deloads, diet, like all these things that we know now as far as the knowledge, yeah, my progress is much better now. So here's the thing, is like, even though I was lifting heavy ass weight, it still could have been more optimal. And that's the thing now. It's like, because people aren't in their fancy, don't have their fancy equipment now. They don't have like the loading. They think they're not going to make progress. So I've seen this where people are like, right now, they're like, I can't train. And they're just choosing not to train altogether because their environment's changed. So to me, it's like, okay, there's other ways to make progress other than just how much weight we're lifting. You know,
Hmm.
there's all kinds of different tools that we can use: myoreps, blood flow restriction training, body weight, resistance bands. We know through the research that higher reps creates hypertrophy as long as we're getting close to failure or we're taking it to failure quite often. Of course, there's drawbacks to that type of thing because obviously the demand of training is pretty high. It's different too, like going from training with heavy weights to all of a sudden light. Like it's like, holy shit, I think I'm gonna throw up now because the endurance
Hmm.
factor. But like with anything, the body adapts over time and you learn, okay, shit, that was hard. Maybe I need an extra day off or something like that. So again, like you said, it's like a chance to learn more about yourself. Um, but yeah, I think it's just it's a to me it's like an opportunity again. And the thing too is that I think, and this is my prediction, is that prior to this, in the bodybuilding world, everything was evidence based, and we had to have some type of evidence to justify the things that we're doing. And if we didn't have that, it's wrong. But
Hmm.
now I think people are going to really realize, like, okay, I don't have to be quote unquote perfect or optimal, quote unquote, Like you're going to learn like, okay, optimal is what you can do practically and sensibly according to the circumstances that you're under, your life circumstance. So when we get, hopefully we get back to real life sooner than later, right? Like back to normalcy. I think people might be a little bit more relaxed once they get back into their normal environment. Like, okay, and that's kind of where I've been the last few years with myself, is understanding that with my context, you know, I know how to maneuver my day to day. And it might not be quote unquote according to what science is saying all the time, but for me, my own journey, my own personal trial and error, my science experiment on myself, I know it more or less works and doesn't work because I've gotten myself away from looking externally all the time and looking at those people that maybe are up here, like I have to do everything according to that. It's like, yeah, they can get me into the ballpark, but I'm the one who has to play the game
Mm-hmm. Oh
according
yeah.
to what I'm experiencing. So I think in the end, when we get out of this, hopefully, like I said, sooner than later, I think it might help to relax a lot of people because a lot of people are just like they get paralyzed, over minutia.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my prediction. We'll see though. But
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think just the fact that we have the choice, to the freedom to do so many things in normal life sort of gives us the the chance to be so obsessive and rigid. I think as I think um, a prep story of mine would be when I remember showing to the grocery store and they didn't have the exact brand of oats that I usually bought. And I mean, like logically,
you
it's
had a
like,
meltdown, huh?
and logically, it's like, dude, like they're the same. It's the same thing. It's biologically the same thing. And I still waited, till the next week to stock up on my oats because and then because it was possible, and like I think the fact that now that that's been taken away from us in terms of the degree of control that we have, I think it'll give us a lot of confidence that these things that logically shouldn't matter, like or not necessarily don't matter, but the fact that um you can still make progress in these quote on paper suboptimal situations. It'll give us a lot of reassurance in the future in terms of our own programming that it's going to be okay.
I think so. You know who Rick Barry is?
No,
Probably
actually.
before. So Rick Barry is like a pretty damn good basketball player from like the 70s. He used to play for the Warriors actually, and he had a very unorthodox free throw. So basically, he did a granny style. He just basically
Oh,
shot it
I've heard
underhand.
of him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he was really good at that. Like I think his career free throw percentage is 89%. So that's like
Wow.
almost 9 out of 10 shots he would
Yeah.
make, granny style. Well, if you kind of think about it, like right now, everybody is now Rick Barry
Hmm.
because, and that's kind of how I kind of base the way I do things. Like, because people look at from the outside looking in at my training because they think, oh, Jeff's a low volume trainer. He only does 9 or 10 exercises at any given time. So I was always perceived as like this outlier or someone who just is like totally against the grain. But see, this thing is like everybody is kind of like, doing things like the normal way, right? Or according to like we're to keep talking about like the science guys. Hey, this is regular free throws. Here's Jeff doing Rick Barry granny style shots, and it works.
Hmm.
But I perfected my shot, right? So that's why I'm pretty successful, is because even though I'm not going with the grain, I'm against the grain, but I've learned to perfect that. And I think now, especially, we have to think about, okay, if this pandemic goes on for a while, and we do have to do this social distancing for a while, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna,
Hmm.
you're gonna have to learn how to be a Rick Barry. You're gonna have to learn how to perfect the shot that you're taking now. So whether
Hmm.
that's, hey, I only have resistance bands to train, or I only have a 5 gallon water jug, or I only have 20-pound dumbbells, or whatever equipment you have, or whatever your training environment is, it's now different than what it used to be. Now you're kind of forced to shoot granny shots.
Mhm.
So it's either you fight that and go, shit, my shot is just gonna suck, or you say, you know what, I'm gonna make this bitch mine, and I'm gonna perfect it.
Mhm.
So that's again goes back to, hey, it's a half glass full mindset. Work with what you got, perfect it. It's your own time right now. It's your trial and error. Make it work best you can. And then, hopefully when we go back to some normalcy, okay, yeah, I rather prefer to go back to my fancy leg press. Well, that's okay too. And when the time's right, you go back to it. But
Mhm.
right now, that's kind of how I look at things right now. It's like we're all kind of taking those granny shots. So we just need to learn to perfect it the best we can.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, sort of on the to go a bit more into nuts and bolts. What would be your advice for, I guess, exercise programming? I guess we could go into mainly just the big muscle groups like leg training. What are you recommending for athletes? Let's say we're talking about a pretty advanced athlete who suddenly has zero access to any equipment.
Like zero, none, body weight,
Yeah. Yeah.
blood flow restriction.
Okay.
Yeah. So body weight, like sissy squats, body weight lunges. Just basically anybody who's listening, just Google blood flow restriction training, get some knowledge on it. But basically, that's what I would be doing. You can do hip thrusts that way, one-legged hip thrusts. You can do one-legged RDLs, using blood flow restriction. You can do your calves, body weight standing calf raises, and that kind of covers your bases.
Hmm.
Upper body, we can do plyo push-ups, regular push-ups. You can change the spacing of your hand spacing, go wider, get a little more delts, go a little narrower, get some triceps in there. You can incline push-ups, you can decline push-ups. So you're basically covering your chest, you're covering a little bit of your front delts, a little bit of medial delts, getting your triceps hit. Um, then from there, I mean, if you have a pull-up bar, or you can do, hang off a tree limb or something, you can do pull-ups. You can do inverted rows. Like when I was on vacation, I used the dining room table, did inverted rows to hit my back. Um,
Hmm.
you can also lift your suitcase, fill your
Yes.
suitcase with books or whatever, your backpacks. So it's kind of endless, what you can do. And I put it even on my Instagram story. I just showed my son doing ketchup rows, basically grabbing a ketchup bottle and doing rows. Not, hey, everybody should go out there and use ketchup bottles, but the point being, you can grab anything of weight and lift it. Gravity is that's my tagline now. Weight is weight, gravity is gravity.
Hmm.
So it doesn't matter what items we're using as long as we're replicating movement patterns. And obviously, if the rep range is getting higher, then we got to get closer to failure. So if we're looking at 15 reps or above, like, you definitely need to go closer to failure, if not going to failure. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of endless. Myoreps is another one. Like look up myoreps. So basically, it's just taking, let's say, your first set. So let's say, like, I did them yesterday. So I did push-ups, and I did a whole workout yesterday with push-ups and just resistance bands, because I felt guilty because I have a nice home gym. So I'm like, well, let me do this workout with bands. One, as a coach, I can get experience actually taking myself through a training session. So in a sense, getting myself in the same environment a lot of other people are in right now, to see how actually, these workouts are, if they are effective or what. And man, I did my reps for the entire workout. So for the push-ups, I was doing incline push-ups. So first set, I just went to complete failure. I think I was in the neighborhood of like 25 reps on the first set, somewhere in there. And then what you do is you take 3 to 5 deep breaths in between sets after that. So once you get those 3 to 5 deep breaths in, you go right back at it, and you go to complete failure again. And typically you'll get anywhere between maybe 25 to 50% of the reps you would do in the first set.
Hmm.
And then you just do like 3 clusters of that. You just, okay, you go to failure on that second set, take 3 to 5 more deep breaths, then bang out another set, and basically repeat that process 3 times. So it's one main set, 3 cluster sets. And I was done. I was wiped out. Like I was like just super, super pumped, engorged. And basically I did the rest of the workout in that same fashion with bands. So I was doing rows with the elastic bands. I was doing overhead press with the bands, overhead tricep presses, um, curls. What else did I do yesterday? I think that was basically it. I did a whole upper body session in that fashion. I was wiped out. And then this morning, the reason I got up at 4, when we first came on, I got up at 4.
Yeah.
Oh man, because I was like sore already. And I know like later today I'm gonna be super sore. It's a different style of training. I'm not used to it. But it was definitely intense. Like I took everything to failure. So I know in my mind, like, okay, the only way I'm gonna see atrophy is if I stop training altogether.
Mhm.
So here I just did pretty solid workout, had plenty of stimulus. How can I not make progress?
Mhm.
Muscles are still being stimulated. So at the very least, let's say, hey, at the very least, I'm gonna maintain muscle mass, which I think in this situation would be a victory for a lot of people, to come away from this not losing any gains at all. So again, that's just one example of how to be effective with your training. And there's a lot of other tools too that you can do to keep progress moving in the right direction.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it'll definitely get our creative juices moving in terms of ways to make things hard. And I think I was actually just reading a recent review paper on just the literature around hypertrophy that was published this year, and what they talk about is that what likely matters most is the overall degree of effort. I think is something like how they put it, which is basically just how hard you're making the training, which is an aggregate of all the different training variables in terms of volume, intensity, and even rest periods, and other things like the metabolic sort of stress, or the burn, as you might call it. So I think that basically what they're saying is that you can get to, there are a lot of different avenues to get to hypertrophy, and it's more like a combination of all of these factors, and not just volume or weight on the bar.
But exactly. Like, I mean, when we were in our own training environment, right, back in our gyms, like if you did 10 sets of something, but the weight was so light, like the intensity was just so low, like that's not going to make you grow. Like if you're doing 10-pound curls, like 10 sets of 10, but yet let's say there's like 10 reps in reserve on each of those sets, like you're not growing. You need, like you said, a balance of everything. You need to have enough load there to create a stimulus. So, like right now, most people's situation is they don't have the load. So then it becomes, okay, how can I get creative enough to create that stimulus? So again, that's why I said training closer to failure is going to be more or less kind of like more important right now for a lot of people's situation. So, like I said, with the resistance bands, like a lot of the first sets that I was doing, like I was touching anywhere between 15 and 20, 25 reps on the first set, just because it's just I couldn't get enough resistance with the bands that I had anyways. So
Mm-hmm.
I knew like, okay, I need to go all the way to failure on this first set. And then, like I said, there's like taking 3 to 5 deep breaths, that's a short rest period.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go into the next set, in a sense, I don't have to do now 15 reps to get fatigued in order to get that basically getting the type 1 type 2 to fire, like it's right
Mm-hmm.
away, like it's hard right away on that next set because I'm taking such a short rest time. So that's kind of the concept behind that. It's just to basically create more demand, instead of like doing all these fluffy reps ahead of time. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why you kind of take shit to failure on that first set. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing right now. It's just people don't have the loading, and that is definitely a key component to creating enough demand and stimulus to create hypertrophy. Is we have to have that loading there to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it'll be good for a lot of people to sort of experiment with this style of training, or what some people might call metabolite training, where you're really focusing on sequestering this sort of uh, getting that pump, and I mean, it's definitely been theorized as a mechanism towards hypertrophy itself, at least from a purely scientific standpoint. And I think that a lot of us are used to the heavy barbell or dumbbell style of training, and we really just think about the weight on the bar, and we don't we don't routinely program in these sort of metabolite blocks. But I think I actually suspect that it'll have a beneficial role, even even compared to normal training, if you add this in every once in a while.
It's definitely, like I said earlier, it's definitely hard to train that way, especially if you're not used to it, because it's like, man, it just creates like you have to have a lot of endurance. Like it builds your endurance up.
Mm.
So that's like that's an exciting thing too. Is like, okay, I'm actually training in a different capacity now. Like you're gonna learn more about yourself from that standpoint. And if you look at CrossFitters, like the really good CrossFitters, I mean, look how they train. Like they're jacked and they're conditioned. Like to
Mm-hmm.
me, I don't consider myself an athlete because what my style of training is just like, all right, I'm gonna do 3 sets of a leg press for 8 to 10 reps, and that's it, right? Whereas these guys are freaking carrying shit for 100 meters or whatever. Like those guys are athletes. So if you think like you look at those guys and like, okay, look at them, they're pretty jacked for, and you look at that style of training. I mean, that's if you look at that, that should give you some peace of mind like, hey,
Yeah.
I can do these other forms or styles of training and still develop a pretty good physique. And one thing I was like Eric Helms on his Instagram page a while back, he was putting a lot of old time bodybuilders on there, and I kind of went back to that, especially with what we're going through now. I'm like, these guys from the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was no steroids or any of that. But you look at their physiques, like, okay, these guys are pretty jacked. And some of them are just as big, if not bigger than I am. And here I am in the year 2020, and these guys, like, this is over 100 years ago. They didn't have the fancy equipment that we have now. They didn't have the knowledge that we have now. But look at their physiques. And, a lot of times you look at that, and you're like, okay, that was built just through effort, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe they were doing some things that you're like, whoa, what are they doing? That's not the wisest thing to do. But because of the ethic, the work ethic, the hard work and the consistency, they still yielded results. So to me, it's like that's I'm kind of pushing people to look at that era right now because again, people's mindset is, oh, I don't have these fancy gyms. I'm not gonna be able to make progress. Well, if you just take a look back in history, it'll give you some peace of mind. And it's kind of inspiring. Like these guys, they built a lot with nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that brings me to another the sort of next big benefit I think we could see with this period, and that is the fact that in the absence of having heavy weights to move, it's really going to force us to think about mind muscle connection and sort of
Yeah.
learning and really thinking about how can I make this movement harder with less weight, which I
Yeah.
actually think is a highly underrated thing. And it's initially when I got into the science sort of sphere of bodybuilding, I would look on the old bros or the old IFBB pros who would always be talking about how to make things harder and use less weight, and I didn't really understand because I thought like all that mattered was that I could fucking like like push like heavy weight, bro. But you well, as you get more into it, you realize that there's a lot of benefit to sort of teaching your the right muscles to fire and knowing how to execute movements for the most efficiency for the target muscle actually makes you that much more yeah, efficient in the gym. And I think it's a big component of bodybuilding where it's sort of the skill of the sport where you actually as you get more experience you learn to target muscles better.
I agree with that. Like if you like my thought is this, like even when I'm training with heavier loads, I try to make my top sets look like warm-up sets, like from start to finish, not just with the first couple reps, but even the last ones that are grinders. I try to make it look flawless. um, because I know if I'm like perfect with technique and form from start to finish, even on those harder reps, that I know the intended muscle that I'm trying to target, it's doing the work. So I'm not relying on momentum or leverage change. It's trying to lean back in a lift or something like that to gain an advantage is with leverage to move the weight. So like you said, now I think with not having like the loading, like people are going to have to rely a little bit more on, maybe rep speed and slowing things down. And that's what I was doing with the bands yesterday. It was like, okay, if I like on a row, I'm like, if I pull super hard, it's going to be super easy, because it's like a rubber band snapping. So I had to basically slow rep speed down to keep the tension on the musculature through the entire range of motion as I was pulling closer to my body. Like the initial start of the rep is super easy because there's no tension there. But as the bands stretch back, it gets a little bit harder and harder. So I was kind of just pulling with super, super control, going so like purposely slowing rep speed down.
Mm-hmm.
And, over the course of 20 reps, that shit got pretty hard and I was on fire. Like my muscles were on fire. So, I mean, yeah, it might not be, let's say, as optimal as like my row machine in my garage where I can load 200 pounds on it. And I'm definitely going to get obviously, more tension there with the load. But at least with with the with the bands, what I have, I was getting the most out of it. And that was the only way I can get the most out of it, would slow rep speed down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I
So
think.
it's just like, again, we have this, with what equipment you have, it becomes how can I be super, super efficient with it? And it's going to look different with what you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Rose example is a really good one because as I've gotten more experience, you you start thinking about, say, moving just at the shoulder and like really just moving that humerus rather than. I remember when I first started out training, I walked into the gym and I said, you know what, I'm gonna move. I want to dumbbell row the heaviest dumbbells in the gym, and I like as long as the dumbbell hits my chest, like that's a great rep. And I was probably swinging a ton and bringing my biceps into it, um, and it's when you develop that sort of connection to the movement, you still get that stimulus and probably even a lot more with less overall stress to the body. And now when I look back on it, now when I go into the gym, I say, like, I don't want to move those heavy dumbbells, like especially with prep going on. Like I don't want to go in and have to slug around this 120-pound dumbbell because that's just going to generate a lot of fatigue, which I think is another factor that becomes more important when you're more experienced.
Yeah, what's interesting is like I had one of my athletes that came to visit me from Singapore. So he stayed at my house and he wanted to train. I'm like, okay, I'll take you in the garage and we'll train. So just a little concept of, okay, I told him, all right, so what I want you to do is when we get deep into your sets and it starts to get hard, I want you to really focus on not letting your anxiety build up. Because usually when things get super, super hard, right, we get anxious. We get a lot of anxiety, and that takes
Mm-hmm.
energy. So I was like, okay, I want you to relax. Like when it starts to get really hard, the last rep or two, control your breathing, control your facial expressions. I don't want you like yelling and screaming like when you're doing these reps. Like really just almost sense be Bruce Lee and be super calm, super poised. And he was quite surprised that what he thought was supposed to be maybe one or two more reps, he actually got like three or four more. So just those little nuances like that can change the effectiveness of your training. So it's kind of like a football coach, right? They'll like diagram plays on the chalkboard, like here, this is how we're going to run it. But until you're actually on the field, then those coaches on the field can do these little nuances to basically open up, let's say, a hole for the running back to run through, like a bigger hole, the way maybe this tackle turns to block or something like these little nuances that we do in the gym can change a lot. So again, that's kind of like if you look at the science, we're putting things on the chalkboard, but when you go to actually apply it, whether it's in a weight room or whether it's a contest prep, it's these little nuances that really make a huge difference. So that's for me personally, when people look at my style of training, how it's really just very simple. They think anyways. Like on, oh, he only does 9 to 10 exercises. He only does 3 sets, 2 sets, whatever. Doesn't look like much, but it's those little nuances in the gym that I do that I get the efficiency. And when you're efficient, you become more effective. So those are the things that like I think people really need to focus on now is if you only have a training band, you only have a 15-pound dumbbell, or it's just body weight, you got to learn how to become very efficient with what you're doing. And it comes down to practicality. What's the most practical right now to get the job done?
Hmm. Shit, man, I thought yelling and screaming was anabolic.
It looks cool. Don't get me wrong. On video, it's like, man, that guy's getting after it. But like if like the way how I learned this and how I come to this realization, because I used to be like I remember training with this guy. He used to live in my court, and we would go to the gym together. And he was kind of like one of those tough type guys. We would be the loudest ones in the gym, so everybody would
Nice.
watch us like these guys get after it. But now, like, I look back on that, like, man, okay, I probably could have been far more effective. And the way I learned that technique of like staying really controlled and all that, like, I was looking at other sports. I was watching tennis, and I'm watching like Pete Sampras, Roger Federer, like these dudes when they serve and when they hit their ground strokes. Like, yeah, there's some grunting there, but everything is like flawless. The mechanics are flawless,
Hmm.
and they always seem to be in control. Like, yeah, they hit the ball, then they grunt or yell, but they're in control the entire time up until that point. So I'm
Hmm.
like, I need to mimic that. If I mimic that in the gym, then I'll probably be more effective. And same thing, you look at boxers. Like if you see a boxer that's wild with his punches, and he's out of control, like he's the boxer that's going to get clocked.
Hmm.
But you see those boxers that are in control, then yeah, I mean, if you look at like Bernard Hopkins, I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but look up Bernard Hopkins and watch some of his fights. Guy's a tactician. Like he was always in control mentally, and he was like a pretty damn good boxer. So that's kind of more or less like where I learned that was not actually in the bodybuilding world. It's more like looking at other sports.
Yeah, no, that's those are good points for sure. Um, Coming back to sort of the restrictions that we have on weights, what would you recommend for people in terms of progressive overload over time? Because I think that's going to be a big obstacle for people who don't have a sort of micro-loadable weight set.
You want to be honest? Like
Hmm.
I'm telling people, don't worry about that.
Hmm.
And to me, it's like if you can get in there and do more than you did last time with whatever training you're doing right now, great. But if you can't, again, take a big step back and think about what's going on in the world and think about what's truly important. Hey, okay, so you can't do one more push up than you did last training session. You're still training. You're
Hmm.
still moving. You're breathing. You're training. So to me, it's like relax. Like if even if you can't make the same type of progressions you typically make, you stay in the moment and realize like, okay, I'm actually training. I'm moving my body, and you're probably not going to see any regression if you have that same intensity. Like if you're pushing yourself. Like I'm thinking about like yesterday, like how can I make these bands? Like how can I progress it? Well, I mean, yeah, there's ways to progress it. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe I can instead of doing 3 clusters on myoreps, maybe I do 4. Or instead of doing one, set to failure in the beginning, 25 reps of failure, let me do 2 of those, and then do clusters. Maybe I take a step back on the rows on the bands. Maybe it's like a half, maybe 4 inches deeper, and I'm getting a little more tension there. But to stress and quantify it and try to log everything right now, I mean, it might be helpful for some people to do that, but other people might not be. So I think it's more or less there's not a right or wrong. It just depends on the person and how it's going to make them feel. Like to
Hmm.
me, it's like, but how do I tell someone right now without really knowing what their training environment is, what equipment they have, how to make progress? So as a coach, what I've been doing is like, okay, let me just figure out who has what and kind of go
Hmm.
from there. So it's been a case by case basis. But generally, what I told all my athletes was, hey, invest in some adjustable dumbbells
Hmm.
because that's a home gym right there. Like you can replicate any movement pattern with dumbbells. So depending on if you have enough loading or not, then you can kind of, formally create some type of progression scheme. So it's kind of like my answers. I know it's a little bit all over the place, but to me, I wouldn't be overly concerned about like trying to create a perfect progression model, unless okay, I'm able to do it a certain way because you have like enough equipment to do things. Like how do you make a progression scheme with body weight?
Hmm. Yeah, it's difficult. I think.
Maybe
I
more
think.
reps, more sets. But I would, and here's the thing too. So it's again, if I say, hey guys, create this progression model, again, you're basically wanting that sense of security ahead of time. Like I have to follow this plan in order to be optimal. Whereas if you just be reactionary, like, okay, I'm going to go in and train today. Yeah, I did this last week. Let's see if I can beat it. Yes or no or whatever. But go by feel. Like, what's wrong with going by feel right now? Because again, you're going to learn more about yourself because you're not going to have all these external things you're thinking about. You're going to be more present with your training.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way of thinking. I think it brings it back to I think a definition of progressive overload that I like, rather than thinking about it as I'm going to go in each workout and add a specified amount of weight, is more to think about progressive overload as my progress in my ability to perform more work, considering that I've had previous overloading sessions, and it's more of a marker of what you're able to do. And I think that really opens up the door to seeing progressive overload as sort of more of an auto-regulated process that has a lot of different routes you can take. So I mean, if you're just using body weight, obviously you can progress the intensity of the movement by going to something tougher, say from going from a squat to like a pistol squat, or in terms of reps, in terms of adding reps or changing out rep schemes, and sort of adding drop sets or adding rest pause sets like the myoreps, and you can all of those ways will get you progressive overload and will get you progress in the end, and can
But
definitely build muscle.
let
Hmm.
me let me throw this point out there. So let's just say last week you did, let's say push-ups, right? Let's say you did 30 reps on one set. On your first set, you do 30 reps. So let's say, and it was hard. Let's say that's failure. So let's say this week you get in there, okay, I want to try to beat 30 push-ups. I need to get 32 or whatever. Let's say you only get 28 or 20, let's say 25, like five less than last week, but you go to failure. So do you think your body knows the difference between last week's 30 that went to failure or this week's 25 that went to failure? Like, is there a difference there? Yeah, the number's different. There's five less reps, but the stimulus is probably more or less going to be the same because you basically took it to failure. How does your body know the difference between that?
Hmm.
That's what Jen, I'm asking you if you can answer that.
That's a good way of thinking about it. I think, yeah, I think, yeah, there's definitely like a few things that come
So,
into.
so if you think about it, okay, it's five less reps. Like your mind's telling you, I performed less, so I failed. But your muscles are telling you something different. Like, shit, that was hard. I went to failure. I can't do anymore, and I got a serious pump. So how, in a sense, it's like how can your muscle not improve on that? So let's say the following week you do 35 reps. Now you did five more. So maybe when you did 25 reps, it was five less than the week prior, but maybe it was just because you didn't get enough sleep. Maybe you were just dehydrated. Maybe it was just a bad day. So
Hmm.
in a sense, it doesn't mean your muscle isn't getting the stimulus, isn't working, and isn't forced to adapt.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of my point. Prior to pandemic, people had it in their were chasing numbers, or they had to basically validate progress through numbers. Whereas now it's almost like you have to kind of let go of numbers, and that's what I mean by go by feel. So if you go by feel, like, okay, how am I going to failure? Or are my muscles fatigued right now? Can I do another set? Like, you start asking yourself these questions while you're training, and you're relying on more like the feel, the instinct, and you're defining what a good workout is based off of how you're experiencing the actual workout itself, not based off of numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's more or less how I've been training, like the last 5, 6, 7 years. When people ask me, how do you what's your progression scheme? I get that all the time. What's your progression scheme? And it's like, I auto regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, it's like, I look, okay, yeah, I can look at last week. Okay, I did these numbers. Let me try to improve that. But then as I'm in that training session, if I'm beating the numbers from last week, that's great. But if not, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do what I can do here and still train hard and not look at it as a failure, because I'm still forcing my body to work at a certain level. It's not like, oh, I can't beat last week's numbers, so now it's a pussy workout. Now I'm going to back off the loads and all that, and have to throw a pity party because I can't do the numbers I did last time. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm still going to get after it and work. My body's still working, and I move on from there. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
trying to get people's mindset is just, hey, back off on trying to be quote unquote optimal, and be okay with not knowing, all the answers ahead of time, and actually experience things internally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, great points. I think looking back on my days when I would chase the logbook, there were probably a lot of times when my form was breaking down, or I wasn't getting good reps in, and I still kept like pushing myself through it just because I knew I'm gonna get 3 by 15 today, like whether I need to hip hinge this barbell curl or not.
Yeah.
And like, I think that there's a lot more to be gained by just focusing on getting a good stimulus and just having a good feel on that muscle group.
Yeah. I mean, the form technique should be priority. So if you can get 15 reps, let's say you get the 15 reps, but the way I kind of do is like, I give myself a rating on form. If it's a 10 out of 10 form, good to go. I can either increase the load, shoot for more reps, add a set, whatever. It's my basically, it's like letting me say, yeah, you can move on if you're 10 out of 10. If I'm 9 out of 10, I'm usually okay with it. So 9 out of 10, the way I kind of define it would be like um, almost flawless form. Like maybe there's just a little bit of momentum, a little bit of leverage, but it's really hard for someone to notice it. So that's
Yeah.
allowable. 8 out of 10 is like, dude, I see you leaning, I see you jerking the weight. If there's momentum, like, no, you shouldn't be increasing the load. You shouldn't be shooting for more. You should basically make sure that form is 9 out of 10 first. So either maintain load or drop it down, clean the form up, or hey, remove a set, or drop the rep range down, whatever needs to be done to ensure you're hitting 10 out of 10 before you think about moving on. So one thing is that you're ensuring that the muscle you're trying to target is doing all the work. And two, in my opinion anyways, for me, it definitely gives me peace of mind, like I am doing what I need to do to potentially limit my risk for injury. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of how, more or less, what I do with my training. Like I give myself form ratings on things, and that's how I decide whether I'm able to maybe bump a load up or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely important, and I think going through contest prep has also made me revisit the whole form and sort of stimulus aspect of things, because you realize that there's so much like the amount of fatigue you generate from these things really starts to factor in when you're dieted down, and you much rather get a good stimulus with less weight, or less number of reps that is technically perfect, and is just more of a feel on your muscle.
Yeah, I'd rather do a leg press versus like a squat when I'm like 6-7% body fat. Like
Yeah.
getting under a squat bar just doesn't feel pleasant. And you're already like the overall demand at that point is pretty high. So doing like some heavy ass squats, I mean, yeah, you might get through it, but then the aftermath is like the next day, like, okay, yeah, that just wiped me out. So that can definitely have a trickle down effect. Like if you just keep pounding like that day after day under that such demand of dieting, low body fat, yeah, it's pretty demanding. So you have to think about, okay, what's practical, what's efficient, and what's going to give me good stimulus, but yet allow for really good recovery. So in a sense, you're balancing out that supply and demand really well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's story for another day. Like contest prep, right? A lot of people right now are probably like torn between whether I prep or don't prep
Yeah.
through this situation.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on that. So, do you have any sort of special cases in terms of athletes, or kinds of what are you doing with people?
Yeah, like I'm kind of allowing them to decide what's best for them. I'm not saying, hey, you need to prep or hey, you should stop. It's more or less just case by case, depending on context too. But I'd say a couple have dropped out of prep just because the shows got either postponed to much later or they canceled it altogether. So someone who's deep into their prep, it doesn't make sense. Like, hey, if your show is postponed until the fall, to keep them that low body fat for that long period of time. It's not practical. It's probably not the healthiest thing to do. So for them, it's like, yeah, let's just call it a day. Um, and then I have other ones that their shows, July and beyond, we have hopes that the shows are going to continue. So we're still prepping. And I know there's probably some concern with people like, oh, you shouldn't be low body fat levels right now. You shouldn't be in a deficit with what's going on because of the pandemic. But I think as long as you're not making things super invasive where you're dropping a lot of weight really fast, because obviously the more fatigued you're going to get, your immune system naturally is going to be a little more susceptible. So just making sure that the deficit's not too great. You're still getting in, plenty of micronutrients. You're getting plenty of water in, you're getting enough sleep. You're not killing yourself in the gym. Like just really trying to make it a point to really balance out the demand really well, making sure that we're pacing things. Yeah, and any signs or hints of like, yeah, I think I'm run down, or hey, back off. I had one athlete that actually he got hit with allergies pretty hard, but he wasn't sure, hey, did I catch this thing or not? And it was like right away, like stop dieting. It was like stop training, stop dieting, and we just increased his food quite a bit and just chill. And yeah, basically, yeah, it's just some case of really, really bad allergies. But yeah, you don't want to play around with this thing. Like I'm always one who like, I'm very conservative, very cautious. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts around it. But it's case by case. I try to put myself in their shoes. Like if I was prepping, what would I do? Um, I probably would keep going as long as things aren't overly invasive. And more or less, that's kind of how my preps have been. The last 5 years been very, very, like you know me. I've prepped for like a year. People are freaking out. It's a
Yeah.
long time. I should be dieting for a year, but it's like the pace is just so slow. I don't even necessarily feel it. And I think last year I was only sick once, and that was because my son got sick and he passed it on to me. But outside of that, yeah, I just never felt like I was super run down or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Allergies are the worst, man. Like, I was in the same situation. That as soon as the cherry blossoms come out here, I'll have a few days where it's bad. And I remember as I was at the hospital and sneeze, and like every nurse in the unit like whips their head around to look
Oh
at me. I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh shit.
yeah. Because last week actually, because I've been getting hit with allergies myself. It's just that time of year. And last week, man, I was like, I woke up with a little bit of a sore throat. And my nose was kind of like running and stuffy. I was like, oh shit, it started to freak out a little bit. But then my ears started to itch. I'm like, okay, this is allergies. And
Mm,
so it's definitely scary though.
hmm Yeah, it's some crazy times. Were there any things you wanted to bring up while we're here, Jeff? Because I mean, floor is
Man,
open.
I think we've covered a lot. Hopefully people don't listen to all this and go, man, this guy doesn't care about progressive overload or any of that stuff. But it's just more like I just want people to just really realize that bodybuilding is not a necessity. It's actually a luxury, and for a lot of us, it's a hobby.
Mm,
And really, pandemic or no pandemic, what I've learned, over my years is that the main thing is to have fun. Like if you're not having fun doing it, like if it's stressing you to the point where it's just like you're a big stress ball, you're worried about progress, you're worried about this, you're worried about that. It's like relax a little bit and just enjoy the fact that you're able to do what you're doing. Whether it's a push up or it's some elastic bands or you're moving 500 pounds on a deadlift. Like just
hmm
appreciate the fact that you're able to do it, because there's a lot of people in the world right now that I'm pretty sure they wish they can play around with some push-ups. The people that can't walk or have serious illness, things like that. So that's kind of more or less what I'm trying to stress here is just chill, enjoy it. It's temporary, hopefully, and we'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's good way to think about things and just remember the perspective. And I like to think about bodybuilding and training in general just as playtime. So I think that having this period where you can sort of experiment with things is is a good little game for us. I think. Um, where are you at right now in terms of your own bodybuilding journey? In terms of your several months out now from your prep and
Yeah, so I'm going to probably compete next year.
oh yeah,
Yeah, in July. So Muscle Mayhem will probably be my return to the stage. So I'm probably going to end up cleaning things up as far as the dieting and all that. Probably around September, October, I'll start to clean things up a little bit. And in the meantime, I'm just doing what I always do. I'm training, and fortunately, I'm very grateful that I have a home gym. So my training doesn't really change all too much. But yeah, that's more or less kind of, I'm still thinking about next year. And, it's uncertain as far as what's going to happen with the pandemic, if it's going to last, a couple weeks or a few months, who knows? But I'm not taking that mindset of like, okay, I'm not going to care about the bodybuilding. I'm still going to do what I do because that's my outlet. That's something that I love to do, and I'm still going to plan for it. And that's what I encourage everybody that's maybe listening who's like, yeah, I don't know about competing or whatnot. Yes, still keep doing your thing. And if it's next year, the year after, keep doing, keep training, and just make the best of it. But yeah, I'm excited about next year. Yeah, I'll be 50, so I'm
oh
excited
yeah,
about getting on stage when I turn 50. I'll be 50 in June of 21.
oh yeah.
So when I get on stage in July, I've just turned 50. So, and I want to prove that you can still just do this thing on a high level, but more importantly, on a high level and enjoy it. That's the main
hmm
thing.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. I think you've been sort of a prime example of that and a success story. So, anyways, thanks so much for coming back on, Jeff. And I'll direct people to your Instagram. Still, as I say, one of the best Instagrams out there in terms of bodybuilding experience and knowledge, and the 3DMJ crew and the website and resources there. Thanks so much for coming on, Jeff.
I appreciate that, and be safe out there.
Mhm.